Creating a literary festival is always special. It's always different, with each being a journey of creation, a response to our world. This year has been like none other, highlighting what it means to be human, and the joys and comfort found in shared experiences. As readers, we turn to books to find solace, strength, inspiration and understanding. The authors we explore are documenting the stories of our times and helping us gain a better understanding of where the world might go next. The power of reading and the need for connection and community has inspired the 41st edition of the Toronto International Festival of Authors. And I welcome you warmly to share in this festival and our celebration of stories. Buy a book, discover new ideas, and share them with friends. Dive into this year's festival and enjoy hundreds of virtual events. Consider donating to the festival, if you can, to help support our free program and to help us continue to support writers. Ask big questions and bring people together as we attempt to bring our new world into focus.
We respectfully acknowledge that words and ideas have been shared on this land for thousands of years. The land on which we operate has been occupied by the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. It is part of the Dish with One Spoon territory and is still home to many Indigenous people. We pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. We thank those who have cared for the land and are sharing it with us. We are grateful to be here, connecting with others in the celebration of stories.
Hello, and welcome to the 41st edition of the Toronto International Festival of Authors, Canada's largest and longest-running literary festival. My name is Catherine Graham, and I'm the author of the debut novel Quarry, and my sixth poetry collection is titled The Celery Forest. Thank you for joining us for the reread, The Jade Peony by Wayson Choy. Published in 1995, The Jade Peony is a groundbreaking novel portraying the Chinese-Canadian experience. Set in Chinatown, Vancouver in the late 1930s and 40s, told through the vivid and intense reminiscences of the three younger children of an immigrant family. The story portrays their very different childhoods, depending on age and sex, as they encounter the complexities of birth and death, love and hate, kinship and otherness. Mingling with the realities of Canada and the horror of war are the magic, ghosts, paper uncles, and family secrets of Poh-Poh, or grandmother, who is the heart and pillar of the story. In partnership with the Writers' Trust of Canada, we are pleased to present these digital book clubs within the 2020 festival. Today's event will start with a conversation with Madeleine Tien about the Jade Peony, and at the end there will be a Q&A, so please add your questions to the chat box during our session. Madeleine Tien is the author of 4 books, including Dogs at the Perimeter and a story collection, Simple Recipes. Her most recent novel, Do Not Say We Have Nothing, was shortlisted for the 2016 Man Booker Prize, the Women's Prize for Fiction, and the Folio Prize, and won the 2016 Scotiabank Giller Prize and the Governor General's Literary Award for Fiction. The novel was named a New York Times Critics' Top Book of 2016 and longlisted for a Carnegie Medal. Madeleine's books have been translated into 25 languages, and her essays and stories have appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, Brick, Breeze, Granta, and elsewhere. She lives in Montreal and is a professor of English at Brooklyn College. Welcome, Madeleine.
Thank you, Catherine. It's wonderful to see you. I'm really happy to be here.
Here we are in virtual space, so yes. And I look forward to chatting you about this really powerful novel. And and I wondered if we, yes, I know, yes. And I wondered if we could start with your connection to Wayson Choy and then move into your connection and your experience of the Jade Peony. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I met Wayson for the first time in 2003 in Hong Kong. We had been invited to the Literary Festival in Hong Kong. I just published my first book, Simple Recipes. Wayson, had suffered a lot of health challenges. And as far as I remember, it was his first time to be in Hong Kong and China. Mm-hmm. And it was about to be my first time to go to China as well after the festival. That was the first time I met him. I grew up in Vancouver's Chinatown, but after well, maybe we crossed over for a few years, but Wayson had left Vancouver by then. And he was very kind and generous with me, as he always is with young writers. He was an amazing presence. Oh, I'm gonna get emotional. Yeah, he was someone I really looked up to, and as I said to you in our conversation in email, I was really shy. He's born about the same year as my father. Yes, that's how I always knew Wason from a distance, and definitely with that shyness and that shyness between us.
That's so powerful, and thank you for speaking about him as well too. Did you want to start talking about your connection? Do you remember your first reading of the novel and perhaps what that experience was like?
Yeah, it would have been the 19. No, it wasn't exactly after it came out, which is 1995. It was
Yeah.
probably a few years after that, maybe the late 90s. I think, to be very honest, I was shy to read anything that touched so close, that might touch something of my own experience in childhood. And I think I had very complicated feelings about writing about identity and self and family. I was already doing those things, but I had yet to publish a book. I didn't know how to find the language. And the truth really was that the Chinatown that I grew up in, went to school in, is very different from the Chinatown that Wayson describes. My parents came in a different wave of immigration, under different circumstances, and my family had come from Malaysia. And I think it was a difficult experience reading the Jade Peony for the first time. I don't think I appreciated it as much as I have in the years since. I think it was too close. I think it named things that were painful for
Yeah.
me. Yes, it's hard thinking back to it, because I think I didn't know what to feel about it, and that had definitely has changed in the years since, when I also understood more of the history in the time since. It's hard to talk about. I didn't expect it to be so, but it is a little bit hard to talk about.
You're
Yeah.
doing great. No, you're
Yeah.
doing great. Thank you. Yes, and so let's just dive in and start talking about the characters in this novel. And we have the three perspectives and really powerful characters throughout that complement these main characters as it moves from first person through each section. And would you like to start with the first section? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Sure. So yes, the Jade Peony is kind of like this triptych, and
Yeah,
it
I was thinking
yes,
triptych too, the same word. Sorry to interrupt you, but the same
yes.
thing. Yes.
And I really, when you add all that matters into it, I guess there's that fourth
Yeah.
side, when he tells the one more story from this family. But initially we start with the only sister, and her name is Duk Liang. She's born in 1928. When we meet her, she's a young girl, and this is our first entryway into Chinatown, in the sense of the intimate family space of Chinatown. What for Wayson is a very alive and complex and intricate space, and an enclave,
Mhm.
by force of circumstances, because of racism, because of the Exclusion Act, and all the things that had been in law until that point. But so he brings us into this world, right into the domestic sphere. One of the most beautiful parts of the Jade Peony is that each of the sibling stories is told through a profound transformative relationship, either a
Yes.
friendship or um, a deep attraction or love, and this kind of intimate connection. And so what we get in this is a joining of two different generations: the little girl Zhugliang, and a man that she becomes fascinated with, that she calls Monkey Man, from an older generation born in the 1850s, probably 1860s, and they form this kind of incredible bond together.
They do. And we spoke briefly about possibly bringing a passage in, and I think this is the time to do that. So would you,
Yes.
yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
It's a wonderful scene. It's very magical. It's really only about 20 pages in. This is when the man named Wong Suk first enters this older man, and his body has been really sort of bowed down by decades of hard, brutal labor, and and the parents, the father has told the children, don't stare at this man, treat him with respect. And when he enters, Zhou she believes that he is the most famous character in Chinese mythology, the Monkey King. And she's convinced that only she has seen through the disguise, and that only she has recognized Monkey King in the disguise of this old man. So I'm just going to read a part. Oh, yes. Oh, but she's just finished pulling at his face.
Yeah, let's see if it's real.
I said the next thing father had insisted no one was supposed to say out loud. Wong Suk, I said loudly in Chinese, you all twisted up, crooked. Wong Suk swallowed. He reached out and held me gently at arm's length, though it seemed to me his long fingers, his wide palms, were too awkward to hold an almost 6-year-old with such unearthly gentleness. Wong Suk's eyes grew strange. He spoke to me in the family dialect. Mpa ma lao bak. Wong Suk's voice was a half whisper. You not scared of Monkey Man? I shook my head, took a closer look at Wong Suk, touched his for real wide nose, delicately tugged at the curving tufts of salt and pepper hair that formed his bushy eyebrows. I recognized his hair tonic. It smelled of the stuff father always used. I leaned closer. Crooked arms enfolded me. Mpa, mpa, I heard Wong Suk chant. Not afraid? You not afraid? Mpa. It seemed he could not stop his chanting, nor his heart's rapid beat, nor could he let go his hold on me. I only knew to hold him tighter, lean into him like a cat, a tiger, catching the herbal scent of his body. The air felt hot. This child not afraid of me, I heard him say to everyone. She not afraid. Don't be foolish, I heard Poh-Poh saying, in the dialect I understood, and I could feel her tugging away at my arm. Don't be foolish. He's mine, I wanted to shout. He's mine.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. So there's that bond immediately, and it grows, and we learn more about their connection. And as you say, with each character, there's an incredible transitional moment for them through the connection with the bond, with kind of their growing up, and also dealing with difficult passageways as well too. But it's almost like these are sources of strength for them. And I wondered if you wanted to say more about. She starts to notice signs in the aftermath of sort of something that happens. And I guess because it's a reread, we're not really giving anything away. So I guess we can just sort of go there with spoilers and so on. But I wondered if you could talk about in that section or any section, because signs are so important in this novel as well too.
Yes. It happens throughout because they live in a world that's in between. They live in a world where the old generation, what we call the old bachelor men, because, for a long time, the workers, the Chinatown men, they weren't allowed to bring their families because of the Exclusion Act. And that lasted right up unto the war. So you had these men growing old without their wives, without their families. So the family in this book is one of the rare ones. And so the children, in a way, start to adopt these different uncles, these Chinatown men, but they also become the bearers of the stories. There's a kind of generation of the parents' generation, the parents of Zhugliang and Zhong and so on. Father really is thinking, how are we going to adapt to the new world? How are we going to make this new life here in Canada? We are Chinese, but we are Canadian. And it falls to this kind of extraordinary bond between the older generation and the very young to pass on what kept the community alive, the beliefs, the mythologies, the stories, the jokes, the herbs, the sense of dignity, I think, is the most important. The sense of dignity that comes from knowing that despite how the outside world is seeing these people who live in Chinatown, that they're holding fast to something that keeps them together and something that keeps them both connected to the past but able to to survive in the present. So one of those things is about the signs, and I guess it's like, it would seem at some points like superstition, or seem like, but it's also about reading the world,
Yes.
and a sense that it's interesting because there's this sense that Poh-Poh says that the grandmother, sometimes they call her the old one, that everything is there if you're able to see it. You just have to pay attention. Everything is there to be read. And it's true with the little girl. It's because the monkey man is going to go back. For the Chinese, it was really important to be buried in your ancestral village. And so for years, they would try to raise money to bring the bones back to China so that they could be returned to their families and their spirits would be at peace. And Monkey Man is given the opportunity to accompany the bones back to China. And so he has to leave the little girl in the family. And she doesn't know for a long, she's the last to know, really. But she says in that kind of retrospective voice that she could have, the signs were there all along. Oh, it's quite emotional. I mean, it's we were saying earlier, like, just being able, the gift of rereading this book right now was so powerful. And I had just read it again last year, so it wasn't that it was so far out of my memory, but it tears me apart every time. I just think it's a masterpiece. It's an incredible first novel. It's an incredible novel. I think it's one of our great works of Canadian literature.
And I think too that says to the connection that continues to grow in the rereading, so that there's more and more to be revealed and to be connected with, and which is master storytelling, isn't it? Then as well too, right?
He's that kind of storyteller that is enchantment, the delight, the joy, the magic, and yet he's also giving us a tremendous amount of history of Vancouver, of the city, and history from an angle we didn't have before, that wasn't present in the mainstream. And that I don't think people should ever underestimate how difficult that is to both enchant and also like fill in this historical fabric that we should know but we don't.
And it's so interesting too that it's from children's perspectives at various points when they're growing up, and that adds an interesting dimension I found in terms of what it's like to get the voice of the child and the magic that's there, as it is with Monkey Face and so on. But it is there in the way that all of the children that narrate through the novel have that sort of way of coming into it so innocently and learning something that many readers may have passed through already in their reading of it. So there's that knowing that comes from being an adult if you're reading it. Of course, you can read this at any age, but that fact too, that then, especially the knowing that can come in the third section with what we kind of are, it's sort of a Romeo and Juliet love affair, and so much happens in that third section with, is it Seki? Am I saying it?
Yeah, Seki, little Seki.
And so Seki is Poh-Poh, and please let me know if I'm mispronouncing Poh-Poh, who is also, I mean, we could spend the rest of the time just talking about Poh-Poh.
Oh yes, but, what a character.
Such richness there, but there's such a connection too with the two, the youngest and Poh-Poh. And I mean, we've jumped from the first to the third, but it just sort of happened naturally. But I wondered if you could talk about Seki and that relationship, and then also what happens there in terms of, anything you'd like to say.
Yeah, that's a big section of the novel. And Seklung is the youngest. He's known as Seki. He's born in 1933. He's just a little thing. He is very close to Poh-Poh. And I should note too that even when I was reading it, my pronunciation is the Cantonese pronunciation. They're generally speaking a Toisan dialects, but Wayson is really great about just actually letting the reader know just how many dialects are in circulation in Chinatowns. But I would say Poh-Poh, and Seki he doesn't have TB, but he has weak lungs. So he's one that's kept at home. They're very worried at him. He's the only son that's born to the woman he calls stepmother, but is in fact his mother. And Poh-Poh, the grandmother, the old one, takes Seki under her wing, and there's this incredibly special bond between them. I had a grandmother like this, so
Oh,
it feels
lovely.
very real.
Uh,
And I was also a very sickly child, so there was something about this section that really hits home for me.
mm,
But they live in the same world. It's as if Seki understands Poh-Poh's. i- i- He's the one most enchanted by her stories. He's the one that carries um, history as story in himself. And Poh-Poh has this beautiful story, sad story about a young man that she loved that she calls the juggler. And the
mhm.
juggler gives her the Jade Peony. It's a piece of jade. It's a white jade. It has a pinkish tinge. Peony is of the flower. And there's these beautiful images of how Poh-Poh holds the jade peony up to the light and they watch it turn. So there's this idea of the light shifting off it, of the turning of the peony as the turning of these stories. And before she dies, Poh-Poh, I'm not, no spoilers here. I think it's some things are known from the beginning that she wants to make these wind chimes. She was a kind of a, a, a servant girl, very hard life when she was young, but it gives her this dexterity with her fingers and with art. She's able to make the most magical things. And one thing that they make are these wind chimes, which they make out of scavenged pieces of junk. They basically go through all the garbage, and there's this old lady and this little boy looking for beautiful
Mhm,
things.
mm,
Um, so that is their connection, and uh, the wind chime is the way that she knows that when she passes away, the wind chime will sound. Her spirit will be able to find the house, know that they're okay, and she'll be able to go on in peace. So that wind chime is a really important part. But then Seki's whole story changes again, as you were sort of alluding to. There's a whole other story that it, it has to do with the start of the Second World War, the divisions in Chinatown, the Japanese occupation in China as well, the Japanese invasion of China, the very brutal, horrific war that was going on between Japan and China, and meanwhile, um, this this categorizing of Japanese Canadians as enemy aliens and the lead up to the internment. So that story is about this love affair between two teenagers, a Japanese boy, a Chinese girl, and how Seki becomes against his
mhm.
and guess what he would like against what he would like to be. He becomes their protector.
Yeah.
It's a very powerful part of the story, and I one thing I wanted to say is when I was reading it this week, the parts that made me weep
Yeah.
were amazingly parts that were not about the Chinese community. It's almost like it was hard for me to cry for something I knew well, but there's a moment when he talks about a teacher's brother who dies in the bombing in London, and then
Mhm.
there's this story about this love affair, and those are the two. It was so fascinating to me that it's a story about the Chinese community, and but the way that he draws so many communities into this story because we all inhabited those streets, right? We shared those streets, and everyone was facing similar forms of discrimination and also separate ones. And Wayson's power to be able to name these things, to show the divides, but also give everyone their space and bring them all into our consciousness, I think is just incredible, really
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah. It's so moving. And also connecting to that too, we see in subtle ways how stepmother is part of that as well. And she's sort of in the background through the novel, but such a strong presence. And I felt like her presence just grew as the novel moved forward. And her connection too, of course, to is it Mei? It's
Yes,
yeah.
the
So
young
she,
woman.
the Chinese girl, falls in love with the Japanese boy, and Saki sees their connection too, and so through that we can put the pieces in as viewers of this relationship and sort of the secrets that have to be kept, and also the empathy and how it isn't black and white, and how how she also, as a young girl, sees the boy she loves, not had nothing to do with the race and anything of that. So, yeah, it's I found that just heartbreaking as well too, and really, really powerfully done. And really interesting too to see how Seki, well, he changes because I mean, in the beginning of the novel too, aren't they playing that game where they want to whack off heads?
Yes, it's like to raise money for China, and they have this, yes, quite violent game.
So there's that sort of abstract, play, and then there's the reality. Here's a person, and then you think, well, why do I have to hate this person? So it's it's so many things done in such a sort of real way through authentic relationships.
It's really incredible. Like I have to say, I sometimes feel that he hasn't gotten the credit that he so richly deserves as a stylist, as a great writer, as the way he uses language. I mean, we think of Wayson and we think of how he represented the community, how he brought this story into the light.
Yeah.
And maybe sometimes in that conversation about representation, we forget what a great artist he was. Like, just this incredible writer. Like, every sentence.
Yeah.
It's just the weight, the balance, and I sometimes think too, it's like he had to conceptualize this world into English. That is it. It's like trying to invent the world again, to try to stretch the language so that it could hold these worlds. And I think he does it so effortlessly that we don't even realize he's doing it. But as a fellow writer, I look at it and I think, it's really extraordinary. Like, why didn't this man win the Gilder at every prize that was out there? How did that not happen?
And that's what's so lovely about a project like this, or reread, and books, because books are alive not just in their little pocket of when they are published. They're alive for the rest of the time they're there. And so, it's wonderful to put lenses on books that have such power to them, and hopefully viewers will be like, I want to reread that now, or read it for the first time. And,
it hasn't. 1995. I mean, it feels as alive and vivid and rich and contemporary as it ever did. Wow! In the sunlight, it's glowing. It's
look at that! That's a sign right there. Oh, that's lovely. Yeah, and just thinking too about the sense of community as well that comes in, and also the sense of family, the rankings that are part of that. I wondered if you could talk about sort of the rankings.
Yeah, it's so funny because some things he says are just so actually, I think in most Asian languages, in the way we address uncle or aunt, there's a specific word for exactly what the relation is.
Yeah.
So it matters whether it's the third aunt on the mother's side of the cousin, or et cetera, et cetera. There's a specific word. So the system of the naming of relations is an integral part of the language, and or integral part of the relations, and as also, like, it's generational too. I mean, this is sort of goes to why I really found it hard to talk to Wayson. I do have this sort of ingrained, the respect of the elders is pretty deep in me, and the age difference and how you would address, and then add in the family relationships, it can get quite complex. So this is something Seki never masters, and Poh-Poh, or the adults, always tell him, you have no brain, which is something I heard a lot. I guess in Toisan it was mo no, in Cantonese it's mo lo, but I heard that a lot. Yeah.
Well, you proved I'm wrong. So yeah, it's but interesting too. That's also the challenge, the transition from the old to the new, and sort of that space as well of and what's lovely in that relationship that Seki has with Poh-Poh is that he's convinced she's not gone. He knows that, so she's there with him, and we feel that too in the Jade Peony and how you described it and so on. And there was that connection to the juggler as well, and she had a sign. Did you want to talk about that sign just before she died? Yeah.
The sign. Oh yes, with the cat.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, her sense of knowingness is very deep, and I think also what's so beautifully rendered is how the superstitions are also to ward off what what one fears. You know, she's constantly saying, "I die soon, I die soon." But when she sees, it's that she believes that the cat that she sees is not a cat, but a spirit who's come to, as the sign to tell her that she's come to the end of her life. And that's how it comes to pass. But what's vivid is she tells Seki, I'll always be with you. And I think Wayson writes very beautifully and very subtly about that very Chinese sense of the afterlife, in which, you know, there is that whole tradition that says they're all still there in the underworld. They're all still living their lives. They're all still like, I don't know if people, because there's the paper offerings, the paper things that we burn. I did this for my parents as well, and this thing that you keep talking to them. They never leave. That they're it's just that it's another world that we can't see, and whether one believes it intellectually, but I have to say it is an incredibly consoling thing, and it gives you a space to continue a conversation and to feel that all. I don't know how to put it. That I do feel that in the culture there is this feeling of obligation to those who have passed. That there is no rupture between what was and what is. That we are all carriers of these stories and these histories and this memory. And yes, and those our ancestors are not our little. You know, I mean, they're criticizing from the afterlife. It's a very human kind of experience. Like, they're not just sitting in, they're not angels who are like, it's all good. They're really like still engaged with the business of life.
Yeah. So there's no hiding.
There's no hiding, but there's this constant conversation, which I find powerful. Yeah.
And you mentioned you've lost both your parents now. Yeah. I mean, I know myself too, and I have conversations with them. So I mean, it's natural to me as well. So I totally understand that. And speaking of conversations, I can't believe our time is just flying, Maddie, and we are moving into Q&A. So
sure.
Some questions from the audience. Wonderful. So let's see. Can you speak about how gender identity, traditional gender roles are explored in this novel? I'll repeat that. Can you speak about how gender identity, traditional gender roles are explored in this novel? And that's wonderful, because that's really tying to the second section, which we didn't get a lot of time to explore. Go ahead.
Yes. Yes, it feels so complex in this novel. I think the way he writes only sister, Jok Liang, the way he writes stepmother and Poh-Poh, they're and Mingling, they're four very different temperaments, four very different souls, and you know, Wayson writes about how stepmother, even though she's the mother of the youngest two, is always in a secondary position. She's not first wife. First wife has passed away. There is a kind of hint that stepmother was purchased. It's a complicated part of the backstory that doesn't really enter the Jade Peony. But it's incredible that the novel begins with a woman and ends with the woman. It ends with the naming of stepmother as mother. And I think the book itself shows these women coming out of the spaces that are consigned to them, and it's incredibly powerful because he starts with the daughter, which is you know, in a time in which sons are so valued.
Yes.
For all sorts of reasons, including sort of pure survival. They just the kind of labor, backbreaking labor that was demanded of Chinese men. It's just pure survival. And but the first character who is able to bind the worlds together is only sister. And then the middle story that we didn't talk about yet, about Jung-sam, who has this incredible relationship with an older boy named Frank. Frank Yuen, who's a boxer. They box together, and we come to understand he's in love with him, and his physical attraction is great, and painful, because he doesn't have the words for it. He doesn't have the naming of it. It is so. It's one of the most moving parts of the book, I think. I don't know how to do. Yeah, it's the thing is with Wayson is such a. It's like what's so powerful with this book is their people are just themselves, and they embody all the gender and sexual identity things, all the things we talk about that are so present and contemporary. He just let them live it. He just sees that this is who they are. They always were, whether it was visible or not visible. And I think that's one of the powerful parts of the novel.
And as you say, they're so real, aren't they, and authentic, that they just come off the page. And immediately, I found.
Immediately.
And I love how you brought up the shift from stepmother to mother. I was so moved by that. And again, just the power of dialogue that's come up in some of the conversations that I've had with other writers too. And when you just have one or two words, like, it just resonates. It's just so beautiful. So yeah.
Yes.
Here we have another question. What is the scene or moment in the Jade Peony that stayed with you the most after reading? That's a hard one.
There's so many, right? It's cinematically vivid as a novel.
Yes.
I do think it's the boxing scene. It's right in the middle of, for me, there are many, but just off the top of my head, I'm curious for you too, Catherine. For me, it's the boxing scene in the middle where a lot of Jong-sum is the adopted brother. He's the second son. He's the adopted son, who comes from very painful circumstances, and this love that he feels for Frank, and this scene in which there's this Frank is drunk too much. There's they begin to box each other, and what comes out of that, and the sort of sorrow but recognition that comes out of that is incredibly powerful. And I feel like the delicacy in which, because there are moments when the narrative shifts to describing some aspect of the street or the city or the porcelain gods looking down on them, or the way that they're in the benevolent association hall, the description of the room, the way he displaces the emotion into this space, and in a way into bit by bit into all of Chinatown and Vancouver proper, is so moving. So that's the scene for me, but I'm curious for you what it is.
Well, again, I don't know. I don't think about when it's something. It's like all the parts make the whole. So it's a difficult question, but just the one that came up in my mind at this particular moment. I just loved the transition when Poh-Poh was moving to the other world, and how she was still so present, and the way that Seki believed that, and held that. I just that was that was one of my moments that so many, but I really enjoyed that particular.
I love that, because it's and he sees signs for everyone. He sees for everyone. The family's all just like, it's just the wind on the door, and it's just the this and then it's great.
It's normal, right? So yeah, and the bonds never die. I think this book is so much about bonds, and how these bonds last no matter the person is there or not. And even in the first section when we lose Monkey Man, and but that bond continues as well. So
oh, very much. Yeah,
he's just not there in that land, but he's somewhere else, but that bond is there for life. So yeah. I think we have room for one more. How does this novel stand out for you amongst Wayson's other writing?
It's a very hard one. I've got them all here actually, and then there's one under the computer at this moment, paper shadows. But just yesterday I was teaching Dion Brand's novel theory, and I had been thinking about something I'd heard Dion say when I was a much younger writer in my 20s, and she had talked about how all the books together are one work, one book that a writer writes over their given time. And I definitely feel that with Wayson. I feel like all four. Oh, we're so great. We're so lucky to have these four books. They all speak to each other. They're kind of interleafed. You know,
Yeah.
there's a real sense in which they really kind of exist in that folded together way. And his ability to move from the storytelling to the memoirs, and to sort of find that space. But you always feel his Waysonness, his incredible spirit, his generosity, his kindness, his delight, his humor. It's when he passed away last year, I was in Berlin and I just went and got all his books and read them all. Sorry, emotion from beginning to end, because I just could, yeah, just it was a way to be with the writer, and you really feel with Wayson's book that you're really with Wayson.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I guess we'll be winding down. I can't believe how quickly that went, Madeline. Thank you so much for your generous conversation, all your insights, and for sharing your passion for this book. I've been watching some interviews too that Wayson has given us. They are gifts, and he talks about how deepening is important. So deepening is everything. Deepening is life itself. And thank you for deepening our experience of the Jade Peony. I feel deepened by it. Thank you so much. So thank you too to our viewers for tuning in, and also for our questions, great questions. And so you can find this book too on the TIFA event webpage, courtesy of the University of Toronto Bookstore. And viewers, feel free to follow TIFA through Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram on the handle @FestivAuthors. I know they'd love to hear from you. So thank you for tuning in. Stay safe and keep reading. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you.